Vittorio "Little Vic" Amuso, born November 4, 1934, is an American New York mobster and boss of the Lucchese crime family. He was described as a "deadly Don" by Assistant United States Attorney Charles Rose. Amuso's reign is considered one of the bloodiest periods in American Mafia history during the late 1980s and early 1990s. Alongside his former underboss and close protege Anthony Casso, who turned informer against him in 1994. Since the death of Colombo crime family boss Carmine Persico in March 2019, Amuso is currently the longest-serving crime family boss of the five families and American Mafia, dating back to 1987. Amuso has been serving a life sentence since 1992 and is currently allocated at the Federal Correctional Institution, Cumberland, in Maryland, on murder and racketeering charges. Early life. Vittorio Amuso was born November 4, 1934 and grew up in Canarsie, Brooklyn. In the late 1940s, he was introduced to Anthony "Tony Ducks" Corallo, a prominent caporegime in the Galliano crime family, a forerunner of the Lucchese crime family. Amuso acted as a bodyguard and chauffeur for Carmine Tramonti. Vic Amuso was married to Barbara, and the couple had one daughter, Victoria. They live in Howard Beach, Queens. Enforcer for Gallo. He later became an enforcer for Profaci crime family mobster, Joseph "Crazy Joe" Gallo, in Brooklyn. In the early 1960s, the Gallo brothers declared war against longtime crime boss, Giuseppe "Joe" Profaci and the old Profaci faction of the family, because Profaci cut into Gallo's profits. Amuso would allegedly kill several members of the Profaci faction, but was sent to prison sometime in the early 1960s, along with Joey Gallo and a dozen others, for extortion charges. After Joe Gallo's release from prison in early 1971, he continued his war against the family on June 28, 1971, when boss Joseph Colombo was shot. Months later, on April 7, 1972, Joe Gallo was shot to death in Little Italy, Manhattan, New York, while he was celebrating his 43rd birthday. Many Colombo crime family members, especially those from the old Gallo crew, defected to other crime families. Amuso went to the Lucchese family sometime during that year, as an associate in the 19th Hole crew, whose capo was Christopher "Christy Tick" Fernari. Lucchese crime family. Associate Amuso became one of Fernari's top proteges along with Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso. On December 21, 1972, Amuso was arrested by police outside the house on Morgan Avenue, a front for the Bronx Connection kickback scheme, selling prison paroles for as high as $20,000 to prison inmates. Presumably to meet with the building owner, Richard Curro, a city corrections officer and Lucchese family associate, who acted as liaison between inmates and the Luccheses. Amuso was in possession of a switchblade and a file folder of parole documents at the time of his arrest. Made man to prison in 1977, Amuso became a made man in the Lucchese family. On May 30, 1977, Amuso was arrested with Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso for their involvement in a drug trafficking ring smuggling heroin from Bangkok, Thailand. At the time of the Brooklyn mobster's arrest, he had been found with 3 pounds of heroin in his possession. Reportedly, the heroin operation was headed by Amuso, his cooperator Casso, and 2 other associates of the Lucchese crime family. They were all sent to prison. Fernari was promoted to consigliere in 1980, and Amuso succeeded him as capo. Fernari actually wanted Casso to succeed him, but Casso preferred to become Fernari's aide-de-camp. A consigliere is allowed to have one soldier work for him directly. Murder of Frank DeSico. On April 13, 1986, the underboss of the Gambino crime family, Frank DeSico, was killed when a bomb placed under his car went off. The bomb had been planted by Herbert Pate, while Amuso, Casso, and Vic's brother Robert watched from a parked car. The target was allegedly Gambino boss John Gotti, who earlier, with Acceuro, had organized the murder of former boss Paul Castellano, without the permission of the commission. Reportedly, Amuso and Casso, along with Genovese crime family boss Vincent Chen Gigante, had planned Godai's execution, but killed Acceuro by mistake. Although Casso later testified that both he and Amuso had conspired with Gigante, this was never raised at the trial, because Casso was dropped from the witness protection program many years later. Murder of Anthony Luongo on February 15, 1985, Corallo, Fernari and underboss Salvatore, Tom Mix Santoro were indicted in the Mafia Commission trial, along with the top major heads of the five families. To replace him, Corallo put his protege Anthony "Buddy" Luongo as acting boss sometime in early 1986. However, around December of that same year, Luongo disappeared. It was rumored that Amuso, then Luongo's driver and bodyguard, killed him to remove his last major opponent, with the assistance of Casso. By late 1986, Corallo realized that he, Santoro and Fernari were headed for convictions that would send them to prison for life. To avoid internal war and keep up the family's tradition of a peaceful transfer of power, Corallo summoned Amuso and Casso to a meeting at Fernari's house, and decided that one of them would succeed him as boss. Fernari then met with his two proteges and told them to decide which one would take the mantle. They ultimately decided that it should be Amuso. He was named acting boss later in 1986, and the new official boss on January 13, 1987, when Corallo and others were sentenced to life imprisonment. Boss of the Lucchese family. The Windows case. From 1978 to 1990, 4 of the 5 crime families of New York, including the Lucchese family, rigged bids for 75% of $191 million, or about $142 million, of the window contracts awarded by the New York City Housing Authority. Installation companies were required to make union payoffs between $1 and $2 for each windows installed. Dispute with Acceuro. The bloodletting only increased after Amuso named Casso as his underboss in 1988. Toward the late 1980s, Amuso and Casso began arguing with Anthony Tumac Acceuro, head of the family's powerful New Jersey faction, the Jersey Crew, about the profit that Acceuro sent to the family administration. Acceuro had only been sending $50,000 a year to New York, but Amuso and Casso wanted half of the Jersey Crew's yearly take. When Acceuro refused, Amuso stripped him of his rank. In the fall of 1988, the entire Jersey Crew was summoned to meet with Amuso in Brooklyn. 10 of the crew's members showed up for the meeting. However, fearing that they were being set up to be killed, they all abruptly drove off. In a fury, Amuso ordered the entire Jersey Crew killed. The now infamous Whack Jersey Order. Soon, the entire New Jersey Crew had gone into hiding, decimating the Lucchese interests in New Jersey. Amuso and Casso went on to eliminate anyone on even the merest suspicion that they might be defectors or if they were considered potential rivals. Over the next 12 months, most of the New Jersey Crew members returned to the family. Amuso told the crew members who came back that Acceuro was an outlaw and needed to be disposed of. Amuso sent hitmen to Florida to search for Acceuro. However, what Amuso didn't realize was that Acceuro was jailed in New Jersey for refusing to testify in front of a state panel. Acceuro would later become an informant. Acceuro's former protege and longtime rival, Michael "Mad Dog" Teixeira, who was also despised by Amuso, reputedly took over Lucchese's Jersey Crew, the nickname of their faction in northern New Jersey, toward his conviction in 1993, before Acceuro eventually agreed to become an informant. Fugitives and convictions. On May 30, 1990, Amuso and Casso were indicted as part of the Windows case racketeering investigation. Acting on prior knowledge, Amuso and Casso went into hiding. Amuso named Alphonse, Little Al D'Arco as acting boss. But the bloodshed of Vic Amuso and Tony Casso wasn't over yet. As Lucchese Cooper regime Peter, Fat Pete Giotto was charged with violations of the RICO Act in 1991. Suspecting that Giotto had turned informer, Amuso decided to have Giotto killed. On May 8, 1991, 3 gunmen shot Giotto 12 times, but failed to kill him. A few weeks later, Amuso sent word to Giotto's attorneys that his wife had been marked for death. This violated a long-standing Mafia rule that women are not to be harmed. Later, a hit team nearly killed Giotto's sister. The move backfired spectacularly, as Giotto became a government informant and agreed to testify against several major heads of the 5 families, including Amuso. That same year, Giotto revealed details of the entire Windows case operation, several murder and conspiracy charges, loan sharking and extortion, as well as money laundering and drug trafficking operations around Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan and the Bronx. Amuso issued several other orders that led many inside and outside the Lucchese family to conclude he was no longer acting rationally. He and Casso crafted a list of 49 people that they wanted dead, half of whom were Lucchese wise guys. He also ordered D'Arco to bring in a bomb expert from the Philadelphia crime family as part of a plan to blow up Gambino boss John Gotti. Amuso then turned his wrath on D'Arco, whom he held responsible for the failed hit on Giotto. He effectively demoted D'Arco by naming a 4-man panel to run the family in his absence. On July 29, 1991, FBI agents captured Amuso at a suburban mall outside Scranton, Pennsylvania. There were strong indications that the FBI had been tipped off by someone with knowledge of the clandestine telephone system Amuso used to pass on orders. Shortly afterward, D'Arco was set up to be killed at a meeting of top Lucchese leaders at a Manhattan hotel. D'Arco spotted a man carrying a gun under his shirt. The man later went to the bathroom, and when he came out, the gun was gone. Realizing that the next guy to come out of the bathroom would likely come out shooting, D'Arco fled for his life and turned state's evidence. His testimony, and that of Giotto and many others, proved to be devastating to Amuso's case. In a separate racketeering trial, Amuso was convicted of all 54 charges on June 15, 1991, including 9 murders. On October 9, 1992, Amuso was sentenced to life imprisonment. Casso managed to remain free for 2 more years until he himself was apprehended in 1993. By then, Amuso had been seething over the circumstances of his arrest for some time, and had come to believe that Casso had tipped off the FBI in hopes of seizing the boss mantle for himself. In late 1993, Amuso removed Casso as underboss and decreed that all Lucchese mafiosi should consider him a pariah, in effect, banishing his comrade of some 3 decades from the family. Casso responded by turning informer himself. After the incarcerations of both Amuso and Casso, the U.S. government learned that they each had, allegedly, ordered more than 10-12 slayings while they were fugitives and while on trial, using corrupt NYPD cops Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa as their personal hitmen. Imprisoned Lucchese boss. New Lucchese acting boss after Amuso's indictment in 1991. With the testimony provided by former acting boss Alphonse, Little Al D'Arco, Amuso promoted his Cooper regime Joseph, Little Joe DeFeed, to acting boss, with the help of the ruling panel members, Stephen, Wonderboy Cree, Anthony, Boat Barata, Salvatore, Sal Avellino and Consigliere Frank, Big Frank Los Torino in 1991. It was around this time that Los Torino used the indictments of Amuso and Anthony Gaspipe Casso to take advantage of the situation and gain much of the authority in the family when he aligned himself with Brooklyn faction leaders Georgie Neck Zappola, Frank Bones Papani, Frank Gioia, Jr. and George Conte. Fearing rivalry from Bronx in early 1992, Amuso feared that rivalry was being developed in the Lucchese crime family, as some mobsters thought, with Amuso out of the way, that they could take over. The rivals were the old Bronx faction of the family, and Amuso felt he had to prove that he was still in charge. On April 3, 1992, Neil Millier, one of the most powerful capos of the family, was celebrating the birthday of a friend's granddaughter in a Westbury, New York restaurant on Long Island. During the party, a gunman in a passing car fired 1 or 2 shotgun blasts through the restaurant window, hitting Millier in the head and chest. Despite his wounds, Millier survived. The attempt on his life did not sway Millier away from the crime family, though, as he kept operating throughout the 1990s. Bronx and Brooklyn rivalry. As Amuso allegedly attempted to kill Neil Millier from the Bronx faction in 1992, he chose another Bronx faction leader named Stephen Wonderboy Cree as the new and powerful underboss of the Lucchese crime family to keep rivals from the Bronx in line. However, this decision almost triggered a new war within the crime family, as Cree, along with Joseph, Little Joe DeFee, decided to turn the family's power center away from Brooklyn, New York, and back to the Bronx faction where it had been for decades. This, however, didn't please the imprisoned boss Vic Amuso and his supporters within the Brooklyn faction. Crime family consigliere Big Frank Los Torino sought to organize the murder of Stephen Cree using capos George Zappola, Frank Papani and Frank Gioia, Jr., and would further plan to use the death of acting boss Steve Cree to gain the control of the Lucchese crime family. U.S. law enforcement also recognized these members as the actual leaders of the family at the time, and even picked them up on wires and bugs saying they were going to kill Gambino. Crime family boss John Jr. Gotti, son of John Gotti, and his rival Nicholas, Little Nick Carozzo, to split up the Gambinos. This conspiracy also included Genovese crime family boss Vincent Chen Gigante and On the Lam leader Anthony Gaspipe Casso before he was apprehended. But due to massive indictments of the time, slashing all members of the 3 families involved in the conspiracy, the plot never succeeded, and Amuso continued to run the family from prison as most of the conspirators themselves were sent to prison. Restructure of the family. During the mid-1990s, the majority of the Brooklyn faction leaders, many of whom were known Amuso's rivals, were sent to prison on various charges. To keep some sense of stability within the Lucchese crime family, Amuso promoted his loyal friend and Brooklyn capo Louis Bagels Dadone to the position of consigliere, replacing Frank Los Torino. Amuso also kept Joseph, Little Joe DeFee as the crime family's acting boss. DeFee oversaw important crime family operations such as those in the garment district, which brought in between $40,000 to $60,000 a month. Amuso kept Stephen Wonderboy Cree of the Bronx as the underboss, overseeing the construction and union racketeering operations that made the crime family between $300,000 and $500,000 a month. Dadone was put in control of the crews and street soldiers that took care of all the debt collection and muscle work, basically the collection of gambling and loan sharking debts, the extortion operations and allegedly murder for hire. After Dadone was promoted to the number 3 spot, Long Island Cooper regime Joseph, Joe C. Carey stepped up to run Dadone's former crew. Joe DeFee's imprisonment. On April 28, 1998, DeFee was indicted on 9 counts of racketeering stemming from his supervision of the crime family rackets in New York's garment district from 1992 to 1997. The prosecution reported that since the mid-1980s the Lucchese crime family had been grossing between $40,000 and $60,000 per month from the garment district rackets they controlled. In December 1998, DeFee pleaded guilty to the charges and received 5 years in prison. Angry at his guilty plea, Amuso became uncertain of DeFee's loyalty to the crime family and, in the future, Amuso would regard DeFee as a traitor and thief. Wonder Boy's enormous profit. After the imprisonment of Joe Tafid in 1998, Amuso handpicked Bronx faction leader Stephen Wonder Boy Cree as the new acting boss of the Lucchese crime family. Cree, a loyal Amuso underboss, began sending a larger amount of the crime family's profits to the imprisoned boss, which convinced Amuso that Tafid had been skimming profits from the crime family the whole time he was acting boss. Amuso decided to put out a contract on Tafid's life in late 1999. On September 6, 2000, Cree and 7 other Lucchese members were arrested and jailed on extortion charges. Cree was eventually convicted in 2001 and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Stephen Cree was released from prison in 2006. Dayton, Tafid and D'Arco. Following the imprisonment of Cree in 2001, influential consigliere Louis Bagels Dayton was promoted to acting boss and began to run the day-to-day operations of the crime family. Dayton, at the time, one of the strongest and most dangerous crime family members, would continue to oversee the contract ordered by Amuso on imprisoned former acting boss Joseph Little Joe Tafid. Tafid did not know that Amuso had placed a contract on his life, but during Tafid's imprisonment, he was demoted from capo to soldier, and this alerted him to the possibility that he had fallen out of favor with boss Vic Amuso and could be in serious trouble. Upon Tafid's release from prison on February 5, 2002, it was reported that the former Amuso ally immediately turned to the government for help and became an informant. Federal witnesses Joe Tafid and Alphonse Little Al D'Arco gave the U.S. government information regarding Lucchese-controlled racketeering operations based around New York City, which helped the federal government continue their decimation of the old Amuso faction. Both D'Arco and Tafid also provided information about rackets such as gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and even information about some old murders, which led to the indictments of Mafia cops, Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa. Ippolito and Caracappa were allegedly working for and taking large bribes from former Lucchese underboss Anthony Gaspipe Casso since the 1980s. The two highly decorated NYPD officers were apparently used by Casso and the Lucchese crime family to gain valuable information about ongoing police investigations and cases concerning New York Mafia member. The two bad cops were also used to lure rivals and possible government informants to their deaths, and, in some cases, they apparently executed the victims themselves. Dayton received a life sentence in 2003 on racketeering and murder charges, while more than a dozen other prominent Lucchese crime family members were sent to prison during that same year on various charges. The committee ruling panel. After the conviction and imprisonment of acting boss Louis Dieudonné in 2003, Amuso instituted a new ruling panel committee of influential capos to oversee and run the crime family's day-to-day activities. Prominent and senior Lucchese capos Aniello, Neil Millier, Matthew, Matt Madonna, and Joseph, Joey D. Napoli were handpicked by Amuso to lead the crime family. These senior capos were chosen as street bosses to work in tandem. Instead of placing one particular member in the official underboss position, Amuso divided the power between 3 influential capos. Millier, a former Corallo loyalist and Amuso rival, is now said to be one of the most powerful mobsters in the Lucchese crime family. Wonder Boys returned in 2006. Former acting boss Stephen Wonder Boy Cree was released from prison, and the ruling panel committee continued to run day-to-day activities of the crime family. In late 2009, ruling panel members Madonna and Napoli were indicted on labor racketeering, illegal gambling, and extortion charges. In 2009, Stephen Cree took over as acting boss of the crime family. As of July 2014, Amuso remains the official boss of the Lucchese crime family. Amuso was serving his life sentence at Federal Correctional Institution, Cumberland, a federal correctional facility in Maryland, on murder and racketeering charges. His register number is 3874079. According to another Mafia historian, Selwyn Robb, Amuso's bloodthirsty tactics resulted in the loss of more than half the family's main members, either as a result of being killed, imprisoned or turning informant. Brooklyn's DeSantis. In May 2019, government witness and former Lucchese soldier John Panizzi testified in the trial against Eugene Castell and revealed the current leadership of the crime family. Panizzi testified that in 2017, imprisoned for life boss Vic Amuso sent a letter to underboss Stephen Cree which stated that Brooklyn-based mobster Michael "Big Mike" DeSantis would take over as acting boss, replacing Bronx-based Matthew Madonna. The testimony from Panizzi stated that if the Bronx faction refused to step aside, imprisoned boss Amuso had approved of a hit list that included a captain and several members of the Bronx faction. During Panizzi's testimony, he revealed that the Lucchese family operates with a total of 7 crews, 2 in the Bronx, 2 on Long Island, 1 in Manhattan, 1 in New Jersey, and Castellucci's Brooklyn crew, formerly Amuso Casso's old crew, which is now based in Tottenville section of Staten Island. Law enforcement agents have stated that Brooklyn-based mobster Patty "Red" Del Rosso is the new acting underboss and that the Bronx-based mobster Andrew Desimone is the new consigliere. References. Notes. Sources: Cadella, Michael and Bennett, Bruce. Alphaville, 1988, Crime, Punishment, and the Battle for New York City's Lower East Side. St. Martin's Press, 2010. ISBN 0-312-59248-5. Capisi, Jerry. The Complete Idiot's Guide to the Mafia. Indianapolis. Alpha Books, 2002. ISBN 0-02-8642225-2. Davis, John H. Mafia Dynasty, The Rise and Fall of the Gambino Crime Family. New York, Harper Torch, 1994. ISBN 0-06-109184-7. Rob Selwyn. The Five Families, The Rise, Decline and Resurgence of America's Most Powerful Mafia Empire. New York, St. Martin's Press, 2005. ISBN 0-312-36181-5. DeVito, Carlo. Encyclopedia of International Organized Crime. New York, Facts on File, Incorporated, 2005. ISBN 0-8160-4848-7. Sifakis, Carl. The Mafia Encyclopedia. New York, Da Capo Press, 2005. ISBN 0-8160-5694-3. Kelly, Robert J. Encyclopedia of Organized Crime in the United States. Westport, Connecticut. Greenwood Press, 2000. ISBN 0-313-30653-2. United States Congress, Senate, Committee on Governmental Affairs, Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, Organized Crime. 25 years after Valachi, hearings before the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. 1988. 1 External links. La Cosa Nostra, State of New Jersey Commission of Investigation 1989 report. The Lucchese Corallo Amuso family slate. Dispatches from a Mob Trial, Anatomy of a Mafia Mole by Dan Ackman. Time Magazine. Blood in the Streets, Subculture of Violence. La Cosa Nostra. Victor Amuso, La Cosa Nostra Database. Victor Amuso Arrest.